Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I am here to talk about Season 6, Episode 1 of FX's Snowfall, entitled Fallout. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you're probably like, yo, you didn't say the thing about watching shit so I don't have to. Well, I don't know if you guys noticed, but someone commented on one of my videos recently asking me why I say that, and you'll have to find the explanation, but that question made me kind of go, yeah, I don't think I really need to say that anymore. So I'm gonna try to leave it out. I'm sure it'll slip up. I'll slip up and it'll find itself back into my intros again. But I don't think it's necessarily necessary anymore. So I'm gonna try to move it out. So sorry, that might have been a bit of a shock to 6 or 7 of you. But let's talk about this episode, man. Well, first let's start with the title, Fallout. The title is appropriately named, I think, after the theme of the episode, which is showcasing the fallout of the events of the end of Season 5. But I think it also could probably be looked at as the theme for the season as well. Like, you know, the fallout from decisions that can bring down a family or an empire, which I'm sure we're going to see over the course of this season. So I feel like that Fallout title, you know, it applies to this episode, but I kind of feel like it's probably going to be a season-long theme as well, just like repercussions from, you know, I'm looking at money, drugs, fame, all of this kind of stuff, and I'm placing that over family, and that's gonna be my downfall if you're looking at Franklin. But I think that's gonna be everybody. I think that's gonna be everybody's downfall, and I think this season is gonna showcase that fallout. So I feel like that's a very season appropriate episode title. You know, this is kind of bittersweet because this is my third season of Snowfall that I'll be covering on this channel. And I've only had this channel for 2 years. I don't think there's any show that I've even covered 2 seasons of, let alone 3. There's probably 1 or 2 that I've covered 2 seasons of, but this is the only one I've covered 3. And it's, you know, it's wild. It's like this is one of the first shows that I covered on this channel, and now here we are, the final season. This is it. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I think this season has gotten off to a interesting start, and we'll get into it. But you know, if you're a long fan of the channel, you know that season 4, the first one I covered here, I was a big fan of season 4. I think season 4 was the strongest the strongest season of the show to that point. And if you are a fan of the show, you know that after watching season 5, I still think season 4 is the best episode. Why do I keep saying that? The best season of the show, and it's probably because I had a lot of issues with season 5. I started to see the show doing a lot of things that are generally considered, at least by me, to be symptoms of a show that's kind of jumped the shark. You know, the highlight of which, or I don't know, like the low light of which would be that whole Tiger debacle that happened like midway through the season. And then if you remember, I had a lot of issues with the way they handled this Peaches storyline, but we're gonna be talking about Peaches. We're still gonna be talking about Peaches, man. I thought the Peaches shit was over. It ain't. We're gonna be talking about Peaches in a little bit. Unfortunately, I'm still seeing some troubling stuff, and we'll talk about it, but I think the good outweighs the bad substantially here in this first episode. Last season, the show almost felt like it was getting out of hand, trying to juggle too many balls at once. And this season already feels like they're starting to narrow down the story into something a lot simpler that will allow them to do the simple shit really well. Like, it's easier to focus on, say 3 or 4 things rather than 7 or 8 things. Some of those things are going to lose some of your attention. And I think that happened last year. And I think this season already feels like it's really honing in on certain storylines. Kind of like think of like a funnel, right? You have a funnel with the wide end. And it felt kind of like last season, they had all of these storylines kind of sitting across this wide end. But now it kind of feels like they're starting to slide down and they're converging into this narrow point at the bottom that's going to end with essentially Teddy and Franklin. Now, of course, Franklin is going to include Jerome and Louis and whatnot, and Teddy's going to include Gustavo, that kind of thing. But it really seems like we are honing in on a Teddy and Franklin focused season. But I want to start with talking about the opening scene of this episode. And I know you're probably thinking, well, like, no shit, that's a great place to start. I know, but I want to start there because this scene not only gave me a theory, and it's a stretch to call it a theory. I'm like 99% sure this was going to happen. But it's also, I think, a little bit more evidence that the show is just not performing at the highest level. It's not a bad thing necessarily. I have an eye that's kind of tuned in for that sort of thing. I'll give myself a little bit too much credit. It doesn't. You don't need a precision eye to be able to catch this sort of stuff. You just need the experience, seeing these sorts of things happen over and over and over in television or film. And it just kind of let me know that they're not putting the most amount of effort into some of the things that they're doing. But again, kind of a minor concern, and it's really something that if you're someone who doesn't watch this video, you're probably gonna get kicked in the nuts when this happens, but now I'm gonna spoil it for you. So this episode opens with a little girl whose father didn't come home the previous night. She's taken to the dad's job by, I don't know if this was a neighbor, like it might have been the mailman, I don't fucking know. But she's taken to this dad's job, and we come to understand that her father is one of the 2 henchmen who was outside the warehouse that was shot by Franklin when he went there to rob Jerome and Louis in last season's finale. So we open the episode with this scene, with this discovery, and we don't see this girl again for the rest of the episode. And I think it's pretty obvious this little girl is going to kill Franklin at the end of the season and the end of the series. And it's one of those things where you see it all the time. You get this character who grows just too big. They're too powerful. They got too much money. They got too many people coming after them. And their downfall always comes from someone they least suspect. Some random person that they didn't consider who has some grudge that to the big deal person is probably something small, like shooting those 2 henchmen outside that warehouse. But to that person, that little girl, that's her father, that's a life-altering experience for her. And Franklin's probably, that's just 2 rando red shirt henchmen. Franklin don't give a fuck. It's kind of like, what is this like? It's like Wanda and Thanos in Infinity War, where she's like, you took everything from me. And he's like, I don't even know who the fuck you are. Like, that's what this is going to be like for Franklin. He's going to get shot. He's going to turn around, and there's going to be like this little girl holding this smoking gun. And Franklin's going to be like, who is this? Like, he's not going to say that, but Damps is probably going to have to convey that on his face. Like, who is this that just shot me? And all the viewers are going to be sitting there like, that's the little girl from the first scene. We completely forgot about her. Franklin killed her dad. That's what's going to happen. Sorry, guys. I think this is an indication of a show that's kind of just trying to get to the finish line. Like, they could have hid that. They could have covered that. They could have done it a little bit better. But I think it's pretty obvious that girl is going to be coming around at the end. Hey, maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. But I got to get it out there so that way we can see, like, the day season 6 episode 1 came out, one might called it. I got to get it out there. If I don't get it out there, then you can't say that I called it in, I don't know how many episodes there are this season. We'll say 10. In 10 weeks when the finale airs, y'all need to be able to say I called it. You can't say it if I don't get it out there. So I did. So I mentioned earlier how I feel like plot lines are converging. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Like I said, all arrows kind of seem to be pointing in the direction of Franklin and Teddy. So I'm going to start with Franklin. After the scene with the little girl that opened the episode picks up right where last season's finale left off. Franklin's still trying to find the $73 million that was stolen from him. He knows Teddy took it, but he also knows he likely won't get it back. Meanwhile, speaking of plots converging, Sissy also wants Teddy, for obvious reasons. We know this, the whole Alton thing, all that. So her and Ruben decide that they want to loop Franklin into their little KGB operation to bring down Teddy. Franklin's also trying to get the money that he stole from Jerome and Louis, and we find out in this episode that amount was just over $3 million. He's trying to get it into a legitimate but non-question asking bank. And I love how Veronique dresses up like super sexy to take this money there too. Like, I feel like the bank would take the money whether you're wearing a sexy dress or Carhartt overalls, but whatever, Veronique. It's like it's in Miami. It's not like it's in Dubai or some shit. But whatever. And in a move that is just asking to get yourself shot in the head, Franklin is trying to sell the drugs that he stole from Jerome and Louis to Big D and Kane. And that's such a wild move because if this is agreed upon, and I'm saying if it does end up agreed upon, but like if this is agreed upon, not only does Jerome no longer have the drugs that Franklin stole, he now would no longer have the income from those drugs that he would be getting from Big D, since Big D is now going to buy Jerome's drugs from Franklin. And Franklin gets to add that same money to the pile of money he already stole from Jerome and Louis. So he's got their drugs, he's got their money, and now he's going to turn their drugs into more money for him, which is also taking away from them even further because he's using their drugs to do it. But that is a wildly it's a wildly cocky move. That is a I don't give a fuck about life kind of move. But Big D, and I gotta stop calling him that, pause, only cares about the money. He's like, while I would prefer to not get involved in family beef, it is what it is, Jerome. If you can't match your nephew's price, I don't know what to tell you. Which, to me, that is getting involved in family beef. You say it's just business, but when you know that Franklin stole it, I don't know. I guess it is just business. I wouldn't know. I'm not a drug dealer. That might be just business to them. I would take that personally. But Kane, however, is going to have no such trepidation about buying drugs from Franklin because he knows that Louis was behind the attempt on his life, also thanks to Franklin, which we saw last season. I didn't expect Kane back this season. I don't know why. I didn't really think about it, but Kane could be an interesting piece in this situation because I had not considered him. So he's awake now, and yeah, Kane's back on the board, and he could be interesting. So once Jerome asked if the exchange had happened yet, and this is in a conversation with him and Big D where he's telling D is telling Jerome, he's like, yeah, your nephew came through and offered me your same product for 10 a key instead of the 12 a key that you're offering me. And Jerome's like, yeah, that's because he stole it from us. And Jerome asked, has this exchange happened yet? And at that moment, it became crystal clear what was going to happen. Jerome had intentions of ambushing the exchange if it hadn't happened yet, which it didn't. It didn't quite end up playing out that way. He didn't ambush the actual exchange, but him and Buckley end up pulling over Black Diamond and Dallas, leaving from the exchange, and Jerome beats the shit out of Black Diamond for not telling him where all his shit is, which was a good callback to earlier in the episode because let's say early in the episode, we see Franklin refuse to tell them the location of his new stash house, which we see him take Veronique to at the very beginning of the episode. So when Dallas is screaming we don't know, we, the viewer, know that they don't know. They're telling the truth. And Jerome is beating the shit out of them for the truth. Now, if we hadn't seen that scene, I think we don't know if Dallas and Black Diamond are telling the truth. We might sit there maybe they're telling the truth, maybe they're lying. We don't know. And we could sit there man, that's wild that Dallas might allow Black Diamond to be beaten like that with, out of loyalty to Franklin. But all of those things don't matter now. We know they're telling the truth, and that makes the scene that much more brutal. If we're questioning it, then the scene isn't as brutal because we're thinking now we're looking at them maybe they withholding the truth. We don't know. So I like the fact that they had that scene earlier that let us know that Franklin didn't tell them where the stash house was at. So while it makes it way more impactful to hear Dallas screaming through tears we don't know, Jerome, and we as the viewer know that she's telling the truth. So that makes it way worse what Jerome is doing to her when we know that they're telling the truth. And I thought that was a smart move by the show to have that scene earlier, because it's entirely different end of the episode vibe if we don't know that Dallas and Black Diamond are telling the truth. But now let's talk about Teddy and how plots are converging in his direction as well. So I already talked about how Franklin and Sissy have their sights set on him for all of the reasons that we've already gone over and we know from last season. But in this episode, we see Teddy on the search for last season's obnoxious new character, Parisa, who, if you remember, she disappeared when Ruben was like rummaging around. I think it was Avi's house, but it might have been, I don't remember the guy's name, but it was the guy who originally replaced Teddy at the very beginning of the season. White guy, I think he had red hair, fancy house. I think he was living at a house of significance. I feel like it was like Avi's old house or something like that. But that guy, I think it was his house that Ruben was rummaging around in. And before Teddy could get to Parisa, she was gone. She was already an incredibly irritating character to start with. And now we have this feeling sorry for myself version of Teddy that's trying to find her. And I don't like this version of Teddy. No, this is one of the things that... this is one thing, but there are multiple examples of what I didn't like about this episode. And we're going to talk about this again in when I talk about episode 2 as well. I don't like the alterations in the characterizations of people. Like when they're too far from who they were originally. And this is a fine line to talk about because characters are meant to evolve. Things happen to these characters throughout their past over the course of multiple seasons or hours of a movie, whatever the case may be. They have these things happen to them and it fundamentally changes them. It's evolution, right? But I feel like sometimes some of these shows, when they're ending their run and they've kind of jumped the shark, they want to make these characters kind of like more bombastic or just generally kind of extreme. Like they want these extreme characters because I think they feel like they're going to pull in viewers, right? But this version of Teddy, this doesn't feel authentic to me. I don't believe that he would be this broken up about Parisa. I don't believe that he would be like moping around looking sad like this. The scene where he meets with Avi's people because he's like, he feels like if he could find who killed Avi, that same person will have Parisa. And he's meeting with Avi's people and the guy is like, does this girl mean anything to you? He's like, yeah, actually she does. And he makes him lean in close, like, well, fuck you did. I feel like the Teddy we've seen up to this point would have shot that guy in the head. Now, granted, obviously he wouldn't have done it in that scenario, but my point is that I feel like the Teddy we've seen, if he really was like willing to scorch the earth to find this character who he cared about, or this individual who he cared about, Teddy's the kind of guy that's like, can you tell me what Parisa is? Nope. Bow. You're dead. Like, that's the kind of Teddy that I'm looking to see. The hardcore Teddy who's doing gangster shit. Not Teddy who's going to get bitched out like that and is just walking around moping. And I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of Teddy in this episode. I've always felt Teddy to be a supreme threat. No matter how he might behave outwardly, he was always someone that I took very seriously as a huge threat. And he did not feel threatening in this episode. And I don't care for that characterization of him. I hope now that he has her and this motherfucker was in jail. Like, she couldn't even have an interesting resolution to her absence. Like, I'm thinking like, okay, he's got to find Ruben. Ruben's probably got her tied up somewhere. No, she's just sitting in jail. Like, what an uninteresting resolution to a story arc for a completely uninteresting character. Like, man, that was terrible. But in an interesting bit of Teddy-related news, we learned that Gustavo, who was arrested at the end of last season, is now an informant working for the DEA. That was surprising to me. There's an interesting scene where that information is revealed because Gustavo knows that Teddy is going to look into this story that he gave Teddy about having to take his nephew to the ER. And if you've been watching Teddy this whole series like I have, I know if you know Teddy like I do, you probably know he's already suspicious. And he will absolutely find out that Gustavo was lying. So I'm super pumped for that. So we're now in a place where it's like everybody is anti-Teddy. Like Gustavo is anti-Teddy. And if he's not anti-Teddy, he's about to be. Franklin is anti-Teddy. Sissy is anti-Teddy. And then everybody else's stories revolve around Franklin. Jerome and Louie, anti-Franklin. So it's like I said, everything seems to be converging on Franklin and Teddy, and I'm looking forward to those two butting heads. Before I wrap this one up, though, I do have a couple of quick thoughts. Well, they might not be so quick, But Franklin puts out $250,000 on Peaches. And I don't know how many of you watching this now watched my season 5 coverage, but I had a lot of issues. If you did, I had a lot of issues with how the show handled the Peaches story last year. In short, I felt were super conspicuous with Peaches coughing. And I don't believe coughing to be a sign of anything specific. But when we're talking about the 1980s and you have a character coughing, what unimaginative thing did people associate that with? That was a clue that person had AIDS, right? So I'm thinking okay, it's the 80s. Maybe Peaches got AIDS and that's what they're trying to tell us with this coughing. Now, again, I'm not saying coughing is an indication of AIDS. I'm not saying coughing is a good indication of AIDS within the scope of a television show or a movie. I'm just saying that's what the fuck they do. I'm just calling it like it is. When a motherfucker's coughing, they got AIDS. That's just how it is, right? It's like now, if you hear somebody cough, you think they got COVID. As if coughing didn't exist before COVID. Coughing's always been a thing. But to me, I felt like they really leaned into a medical issue with Peaches, and then they just disappeared him and just oh, Peaches stole the money, and that's it. And I always felt like that explanation didn't work for me. Not just because I felt like it was lazy, but because I didn't feel like that was in line with the Peaches character. Neither did Jerome. And I also felt like it undermined, what was the point of all the coughing and shit? Him being sick. What was the point of all that if the idea is just oh, he stole the money and left? So I got through the whole season. I'm like, man, they really didn't give a fuck about this Peaches storyline. They're just gonna leave it at that. And that I'm supposed to accept that Franklin and Jerome and everybody is accepting that Peaches stole the money and ran. The fact that they brought up Peaches again in this episode lets me know that the Peaches storyline isn't done. So now I just want to officially quadruple down on my Peaches got AIDS theory. I don't know if he's dead. I don't know if he's in the hospital. I don't know where he is, but I think that Peaches is going to be back. It's going to be a big deal when he comes back. And I think he probably had AIDS. I don't know. But I think the show wanted us to believe that Peaches got shook when he learned that Franklin killed that one guy, his friend who couldn't handle his drugs. I think it's Rob, I think his name was. When Franklin killed that guy for not being able to handle his drugs, I think the show was trying to tell us that Peaches was on drugs because Jerome went looking in fucking drug houses for him and shit. And that Peaches must have bailed because he was scared that Franklin was going to shoot him for being on drugs. I don't think that's it. I don't think that's it. Because again, what's with all the coughing? I don't know. But I'm quadrupling down on my Peaches theory. And then lastly, the other thing that I want to talk about was, I was saying that we're talking about characterizations of people and how they've altered. I saw this on Peaky Blinders, another show that I would say jumped the shark around season 4, which this one didn't, but around season 4. And one of the ways in which I was able to discern that I kind of felt like the show had jumped the shark was it got too big. So it started off as a show about, a small time gangster in this little small neighborhood on a cobblestone street with horses and just how he runs that area. And it expanded to where now he's this huge drug kingpin in this mansion and all these gangster things going on and all this kind of shit. And they started to change the characters up. So Polly was his aunt. In the beginning of the series, Polly kind of felt like she was the one in charge. We got all the tough guys around, but it's really the woman who's running the show behind the scenes. And as the show evolved, Polly turned into this kind of crazy, kooky, potion making, tea leaf reading gypsy. And it was it got ridiculous. She almost became a caricature of her former self. And I feel like they kind of might be pushing Sissy in that direction. So, about 40-ish minutes into the episode, minus commercials, 40-ish minutes into the episode, she goes on this rant, this, anti-government, anti-CIA, fuck the CIA, all this kind of stuff, which, given the experiences that character has had, it tracks that she would feel that way. It's just shocking, I think, and a bit off-putting to see her being open your third eye, Sissy Farrakhan in this episode, which is so far from who she was at the beginning of the show. And she's like, "Is you with me, saint?" And I'm like, who is this? Who is this character? And it's yes, it makes sense that this character would feel this way and have these beliefs given what's happened to her, but it just felt like such a sharp contrast from the Sissy that we've seen up to this point. And I don't know, to me, it just felt like another piece of evidence that the show might have jumped the shark, because they're doing this thing now where they're taking characters and they're making them like this version of Sissy, or they're doing, like I mentioned, like with Polly on Peaky Blinders, you know, changing these characters up and making them like evolve into something that's so far detached from who they started off as. It's just, it's kind of weird and it's kind of off-putting, and I wasn't a big fan of it. But at the same time, I, as a person, I totally fuck with that speech. But as someone who's here to speak on the television show, it was a little bit off-putting. So that's all I got for episode 1. I will see you guys shortly for episode 2. Until then, peace.